very sorry. I showed them Mr. Homestead Act.
Thank you for coming.
Borseth and stuff, but I apologize.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you've got some more room. You all get some extra time.
That's dangerous. Yeah, I know. I just like my space. I like my space. I'm not that bad. Thank you.
You let me know when
You ready? I can roll whenever you're ready.
whenever you are. I'm good.
Welcome to Great Debates, Power, Politics, and People. With your panelists, and your moderator, James Davenport. Welcome to Great Debates, Power, Politics, and People.
All right, I want to welcome everyone to today's Great Debates, Power, Politics, and People panel discussion. Today's topic is going to be immigration. I'm very excited about this topic. It is obviously a topic that is very currently debated and discussed in American politics and American society in general. I think we've got some excellent panelists to discuss this issue and give us a variety of perspectives on it. And so without taking up too much of their time, I'm going to go ahead and do introductions and then turn it over to them. I'm going to have them do their presentations in order as they are from me to Dr. Hotrick at the end. So let me get on with our introductions. Professor Carolyn Cuskey has an Associate of Arts degree in Liberal Studies from Rose State College, a bachelor's and master's degree in history from the University of Oklahoma, and is a member of our history faculty here at Rose State College. Before returning to college, she had careers in public service, self-employment, and in the corporate business world. She began teaching at Rose as an adjunct professor in 2003 and became a full-time employee in 2006. She teaches American History Survey courses, Oklahoma History, and Frontier Women, and has developed a special field of study in the challenges facing first-generation and under-resourced students at the community college level. Please join me in welcoming Professor Carolyn Cuskey. Next we have Mr. Amir Farzaneh. Amir is an immigration attorney and adjunct professor of immigration law at Oklahoma City University School of Law. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree in nuclear medicine and a Master of Science degree in health administration, both from the University of Oklahoma, in addition to his Juris Doctor degree from Oklahoma City University. Amir Farzaneh is the past president of the South Oklahoma City Lawyers Association and a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. He is admitted to practice in Oklahoma and Texas, in addition to the United States Supreme Court, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Western District of Oklahoma Federal Court, and all immigration courts nationwide. Mr. Farzaneh is a frequent speaker on immigration law issues and is the author of several articles and the co-author of 2 books on immigration law. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Amir Farzaneh. Next we have Professor Betsey Borseth. Professor Borseth is an adjunct professor of political science at Rose State College. She is in her 5th year of teaching, and she has taught American federal government classes as well as global conflict and international classes. She has studied in Europe and in Mexico. She has a Bachelor of Arts and Master's in Political Science. Her research focus is on sustainable peace agreements of civil wars. Her interest in immigration, she became interested in immigration while she was an English as second language instructor in Minneapolis. Please welcome Professor Betsey Borseth. Dr. James Hotrick holds a BA in American Studies and a BA in History from California State University at Chico, and holds a master's and PhD in American History from the University of Oklahoma. He teaches African American, American Indian, and U.S. history at Rose State College. He's a cultural and social historian by training. His research is focused on issues of ethnicity and race in the 20th and early 21st century American West. Please join me in welcoming Dr. James Hotrick. Each of the panelists will be presenting on a somewhat different aspect of this issue of immigration. And very briefly, I'll run down for you. Professor Cuskey is going to be helping us understand the evolution of immigration patterns and immigration law in the United States. Mr. Farzaneh is going to be discussing the current process of becoming a naturalized citizen and the length of time that takes, the complications with that. Professor Borseth is going to be looking at current debates relating to the issue of immigration. And Professor Hotrick is going to be discussing the role of communications technology in impacting immigration patterns and immigration across the country. So without that, without any more further ado, I'm going to hand this over to Professor Cuskey. I've asked you to stay about 10 minutes. If you go a little bit longer, I'm not going to kick you out, so don't worry about that. But we do have some time, so go ahead.
Thank you. The first thing I have to say about immigration, well, first of all, let me point out that I'm not going to ask for self-identification, but I have to say that unless you're full-blood Native American, we are all immigrants or descendants from immigrants. I think that's an important thing to notice because we tend to think of immigration as just how it's happening today. But I don't know if you've ever seen that poster, or sometimes it's a t-shirt with Geronimo and three of his lieutenants, and they're heavily armed out in the desert, this photograph, and it says Homeland Security since 1492. I think that's applicable because it gives us a different perspective on immigration. And every ethnic group, as well as every country in the world, has a different take on immigration. For the United States, it was not an issue as colonial when we were colonies. It really wasn't an issue. Of course, Great Britain law dictated immigration policy, although it was very loose even then. As we became the United States and adopted the Constitution in 1788, the Constitution does not mention the word immigration. So it was a non-issue for the founding documents. The first law we have that addresses immigration at all is the 1790 Naturalization Act, and you may hear about this in the news today because Senator Cruz has referred to that because he was born in Canada, and there's some debate about whether he is qualified to be president because the Constitution says the president has to be a natural-born citizen of the United States, and it's the definition of that term, natural-born. So I actually brought the 1790 law with me, and I thought I would read the part of it that is critical. Well, it depends on how strictly you want to interpret these laws. It says that the person who applies for citizenship has to be a person of good character, taking the oath or affirmation prescribed by law to support the Constitution of the United States. So this applies to people who are born in the people who can become naturalized. If you're born in the United States, you're obviously a citizen already. If you're born on United States soil. In the situation of Senator Cruz, he was born in Canada. But this 1790 law says, and the children of citizens of the United States that may be born beyond sea or out of the limits of the United States shall be considered as natural-born citizens. Children of citizens that may be born outside are considered citizens. So that seems to apply to him. Personally, I'm an American citizen. I was born here in Midwest City at Tinker Air Force Base. You can't get any more American than that. My mother was Canadian. But because I'm the first generation Canadian born outside of Canada, I automatically have Canadian citizenship. So it's not unusual for countries, for the first generation of immigrants to retain their heritage citizenship of their parents. I think that's kind of interesting and also applicable to today. Generally, our immigration policy in the United States has applied based on the social prejudices and understandings of society at the time. So over periods of time, it has changed radically. For instance, having no immigration laws at all until the 1860s, we really didn't restrict because we were a growing nation. And we don't think about it this way, but America was a developing nation, especially before the Civil War. We wanted people to come here, and in large measure, we weren't critical about who those people were. For instance, the 1862 Homestead Act, we advertised the Homestead Act in Eastern Europe and many countries of Europe that in the next 50 years from 1862, those people are going to be, it's going to be laws passed limiting those people. So it depends on the situation and in large measure the economy of the country, what our immigration policies are. 1862 Homestead Act encouraged people to come who would farm the land. We gave away free land to people from wherever they came from. They got 160 acres of free land. All they had to do was reside on it for 5 years and pay a filing fee, usually $5 to $10. Coincidentally, 5 years of residence was also the requirement for citizenship in 1862. So you can see how that law was made to go hand in hand to satisfy American citizenship for immigrants. Now, one of the limbo periods is after you get here before you can become a citizenship, before you can become a citizen. That also has varied over time with various restrictions and requirements that apply to it. But theoretically, you have to look at someone who's not a citizen. They may be in the country legally, but not a citizen. They may be in the country illegally, but have applied for citizenship. So there's a lot of categories there. Back to history. I'm getting off topic here. Our immigration policy has generally been driven by the prejudices in place in society. For instance, we identified the turn of the 20th century. It was very common to identify race by nationality. And officials would say things like the Italian race, or the Spanish race, or the Russian race, when they actually were we would term that as in nationality. Remember that we didn't have any sociology yet to speak of at the turn of the 20th century. It was an infant academic subject to study. Also, anthropology was in the same time frame. So the application of those two areas of study have given us a much broader view of other cultures and other people that may have been marginalized in Americans, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans' minds prior to being enlightened by those two academic subjects. Generally, we discriminated in the past, before World War II, against Catholics. Probably that was the #1 group that was discriminated against as far as immigration was concerned, because Catholics weren't considered possible for American citizenship by the average American because they were Protestants. This goes way back to the Reformation, time of Martin Luther, when he split from the Catholic Church. And a lot of animosity hung over for hundreds of years towards Catholics. Really anybody who was non-Protestant. Also a large discriminating factor against Jews around the turn of the 20th century. And some of these have taken a long time to disseminate and get rid of them over the decades. In some laws, Catholics were considered unassimilable. In other words, they can never meet the potential of an American. They can never equal the potential of an Anglo-Saxon Protestant American. So we're not going to consider Catholics as for citizenship. And that was for a period of about a decade. The biggest point I want to make about immigration is that immigration historically has always been tied with the issue of foreign relations, as well as international economies, as well as our domestic economy, with the societies where they come from and with our society itself. So it's a much larger issue than just who do we want to allow to come to the United States, because that affects our foreign relations, which affects our foreign policy, especially as the world becomes more globalized, right? It's like those little mobile things that you put over a baby's crib, and you touch one of the little objects on the mobile, and the whole mobile is wiggling and wiggling and wiggling. You can't touch one without affecting all the others, and that's kind of how immigration is. It's not an isolated subject. Specifically, I have a couple of laws. In 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred immigration and prevented citizenship for Chinese people. Because we limited their immigration to the United States, it caused a labor shortage on the West Coast, and so we started encouraging Japanese people to immigrate to the United States. And we actually had a contract labor law that encouraged people to come to the United States, and if they couldn't afford passage, they could sign a contract to work off the cost of their passage after they got here. This was actively sold in many places around the world, and it was in place for about 20 years until we decided we got enough people, we don't need to anymore, and so we shut that door. Ellis Island opened in 1892, and that is the symbolic beginning of the federal government taking over control of immigration. Prior to about 1870, immigration was controlled by each state. You can see what chaos that might produce, especially when you consider that immigration affects foreign relations. So it was appropriate for the federal government to take that over, and they established Ellis Island on the east and Angel Island on the west coast for immigrants coming from both of those directions. In 1894, we signed a treaty with Japan that encouraged immigration from Japan, and it was actually open immigration. There were no restrictions. All Japanese people were eligible as long as they could work, that we wanted them to come to America. And that lasted for about 15 years until the people on the West Coast, Americans on the West Coast, started segregating Japanese children in schools. And Japan became very upset about that. And objected, and we went through a lot of negotiations with Japan, and then we finally agreed, this is called the Gentleman's Agreement, to end Japanese immigration to the United States, and also to limit their ability to become citizens. This is culturally based, but there's also a racial component to this, as there was with the Chinese Exclusion Act. In 1922, we passed something called the Emergency Quota Law. We had been flooded with immigration from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe since about 1885 due to political and economic events in Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. And these people are mostly Jewish and mostly Catholic. There was a huge backlash against them, especially during World War I and after World War I, which resulted in quota system being enacted in 1922 and then made more strict in 1924. Also in 1922, we re-emphasized that no more Japanese people were welcome to the United States. So 1940, I'm just going to give you some more laws here because this is good history. Between 1942 and 1964, now we had never restricted immigration from Central or South America. That was always open immigration, doors completely open, welcoming everybody until about 1964. So in 1942 until 1964, we had a work program called Braceros, the Braceros program, which invited Mexican laborers to come to the United States because we needed workers. And we're going to continue that. That does supply a huge labor force, especially to farming, in the farming industry and especially in mining. So they're filling a need there for the American economy, and it also did open the door for some illegal immigration. But these people coming in on the Braceros program were contract workers for a limited amount of time. They came in, satisfied the contract labor, went back to Mexico. Most of them did not stay, did not apply for citizenship. This was a revolving door that Mexico and the United States had agreed upon, providing us with labor, them with financial assistance, and then they would go back home and the community they lived in would benefit from that experience, right? 1965, we started to restrict immigration again, especially from Latin America. We limited it to 120,000 people from Latin America and the Caribbean, which ended the Braceros program, and immigration dropped to its lowest point in American history. Now, commensurate with that drop was the influx of illegal immigrants. So when we closed the Braceros program that allowed unrestricted legal immigration to the United States based on contract work, then the illegal immigration, because the demand for labor was still there. And so illegal immigration skyrocketed, and it hit the same peak that the Braceros program had hit, and then it started to taper off. So looking at the statistics for that, it's undeniable that there was a need being filled by that Braceros program. Since the 1970s, we have been dealing with more illegal immigration, especially from Latin American countries. 1990, for legal immigration, we had 44% from Latin America, 29% from Asia, 14% from Europe, 6% from Africa, and 7% from other places in the world. So you can tell that our largest stream of immigrants are from Latin America, and they obviously always have been because they're the closest to us. But because the illegal immigration issue has arisen since we ended the Braceros program, there have been multiple federal laws passed against trying to stop illegal immigration. And some of it penalizes companies or individuals who hire illegal immigrants. Some of it is to beef up border patrols, to penalize Mexico for not cooperating. And that's one of the keys to illegal immigration from the South is we can't do that. We can't fight that fight alone. If the countries that these people are leaving don't work hand in hand with us, it's going to be very difficult to be successful. That's what history has shown us. And the other thing is, as long as there's a demand in the United States for what the immigrants are providing, and that's a broad net I'm casting there, whether that is labor that they're providing or whether that's drugs that they're bringing. As long as there's a demand in our society, it's going to be very difficult to stop those people. So it's much larger of a problem than just meeting who's ever coming across the line, right? Then I'm getting into today and not history, so I'm going to shut up. I'm finished.
Hello, everybody. As Mr. Davenport mentioned, I'm an immigration attorney. I deal with immigration law every day. I deal with people who come to the U.S., mostly immigrants, on a daily basis. So I look at the immigration process from a different perspective. I see it pretty much from inside. All of you who are here, you have some kind of an interest or another in U.S. immigration. I know that many of you may think that our immigration system is broken. I agree with you, our immigration system is broken to some degree. And I know many of you would like for our immigration system to be better, to be more welcoming at some point, and to be restricted at some other point. So let's talk about it. First, let's look at how people can come to the United States and what the different levels of status is that somebody can have. People who come to the U.S., they can come illegally. Those who come to the U.S. illegally, of course, they're illegal aliens. Then there are people who are legally in the U.S., but they're not U.S. citizens. We have legal people in the U.S. who are non-immigrants. That means that they're here for a limited length of time. They can be students that are here to go to school, and when they're done, they go back. They may be here on work visas of various types. So those are the non-immigrants. Then we have what we refer to as immigrants, or legal permanent residents. Those are people who have green cards. Green card is the little card that people carry with them that is the sign or the proof that they are legally authorized to stay in the U.S. indefinitely. They can stay in the U.S. for as long as they want. So they're legal permanent residents. So that's the next step. So we have illegal people, We have non-immigrants who are legally in the U.S. We have immigrants who are legal permanent residents, and the ultimate level is becoming a U.S. citizen. To become a U.S. citizen, somebody who's not born in the U.S., somebody who's not a born citizen, as Professor Cuskey was mentioning, then an immigrant needs to naturalize to become a U.S. citizen. And that's a process in and of itself that many people go through, and then when they become U.S. citizens, they're able to vote, they're able to pretty much do anything that anybody else can do, except a few things. They cannot be U.S. presidents, as you mentioned. So that's really the process. Then when we talk about the immigration system being broken, what is it that we're talking about? There are so many things that, in my opinion, can be changed to help our immigration system. The little handout that I brought in, I hope every one of you have one. The handout really talks about 2 or 3 of the issues that we have with our immigration system now, and by no means is it comprehensive. This is just a few of the issues that we have. But I thought it would be something that you may have heard of, some of the issues that we have, or you may have felt the problems that I'm bringing in with this PowerPoint. So, of course, we're not having a PowerPoint, but the printout of the PowerPoint. To begin with, we have so many illegal aliens in the U.S. And there are so many different numbers by different polls. The most accurate one that I found is 11.3 million. So we have 11.3 million at least undocumented aliens, and that's a documented figure. And the question is, why is it that we have so many illegals in the U.S.? And what can we do to change this? Is there something that we want to do? Do we really want to get rid of these illegal aliens? And if we do, how are we going to get that done? The answer is yes, we do want to get these illegals to either become legal or to leave the U.S. Nobody wants to have 11.3 million illegal aliens here. But let's talk about what the reason is, one of the major reasons that we have such a large population of illegals. One of the reasons is IRA, what I mentioned in slide number 3. In 1996, on September 30, President Clinton signed a law named IRA, Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996. And this law was a really interesting piece of legislation. And what happened was the congressmen and senators that came up with this law, they decided that we have so many illegals here and people are just coming to the U.S. and they're not having any regard for our laws, so we need to penalize them if they stay in the U.S. illegally. So they said, or the law says, if someone is unlawfully present, whatever that means, unlawful presence, if somebody is unlawfully present in the U.S. for 6 months or a year, for more than either 180 days or more than a year, then if that person leaves the U.S., he or she cannot come back for 3 years or 10 years, depending on how long they've been illegally in the U.S. So, and they figured this is really a good way of keeping people outside the U.S., keeping illegals outside, deter people to come to the U.S. and work illegally. If they want to come and work, they better come and do it legally, because otherwise, when they leave, they're not going to be able to come back. Well, so far so good, somewhat. But there's more to it. In the same session, the same year, the same lawmakers, they decided to discontinue another section of law, which is referred to as 245I. 245I, which stands for INA, Immigration and Nationality Act, INA section 245I. 245I would allow someone who is now illegal to become legal, to get a green card from inside the US. In other words, the same lawmakers created a locking mechanism. They decided that here's the way we're going to do it. From now on, if someone is illegally in the US, if someone becomes illegal, the only way that that person generally can get a green card or become legal is to leave and come back. So if there is somebody who is qualified to get a green card, but that person has become illegal, in general, that person has to leave and get properly admitted. Fine. But then, if this person was unlawfully present in the US for more than 180 days or a year, when he or she leaves to come back with a green card, he or she cannot come back with the green card for 3 or 10 years. So imagine that your parents are immigrants from wherever. Let's say your parents are French or Mexican, Iranian, Arabic, whatever. And imagine that you were brought to the US when you were 3 years old. And imagine that you're now 19, 20, you're married, and you have a child. And when you were a child, you didn't care that you were illegal, but now you do. And you're married to a US citizen, you have a US citizen child, you have everything you need to get a green card. But if you leave the US, you cannot come back for 10 years. And the only way for you to get your green card is to leave the US and get properly admitted. Now, what would you do? Would you leave and stay out for 10 years and then come back? Or would you be forced to stay in the US illegally, keep breaking the law, keep doing things that the law doesn't allow you to do? By virtue of staying in the US, you're breaking the law. You rent a house, you're breaking the law. You work, you're breaking the law. Whatever you do, you drive, you're breaking the law. So you just keep breaking the law. So that's the locking system that I'm talking about. And I think what we need to do is we need to really talk to our lawmakers and decide, ask them to please do something about it. And there are solutions. The solution is, why did you kill 245I? Just bring it back. Let people get their green cards from inside the US. And 245I, in fact, had a penalty. What happened was, 3 years prior to that day, 245I came about as a pilot program, and the Congress decided that we can allow people to use Section 245I, pay a penalty, and a penalty fee, which initially was $650, which was 5 times of the filing fee for adjustment of status, and later on became $1,000. And they decided, okay, well, they can pay $1,000 and get their green card from inside the U.S. That would have made money for the government, and we need money. The money that's given to the government is used for all of us. So it's not something bad. You know, we can really solve this problem by bringing 245I back. The government makes money. The money would help all of us. The money would build roads and a better system, and whatever the government does with the money, I'm sure that would help us one way or another. And it would help those people who are illegal to become legal. We do not need to have more people breaking the laws. And then what happens is, when they get caught, they go through the immigration system. They clog the system. Then there has to be an immigration judge that our tax money pays for to deal with it. Then we have to have prosecutors that our tax money pays for. Then they're going to stay in jail. You know, that costs the government about $100 a day per person that we pay for. We don't need any of this. We can just fix it. Then I have a few more examples here as well. For example, I talked about, in slide number 5, the second page, I talked about the terrible INA 212A9C. Well, that's the way I call it. I call it a terrible 212A9C because it really is a terrible, terrible section of the law. 212A9C, Section 212 of the INA talks about people who cannot come to the U.S. Then we got 212A9C. A9C says that certain people can never, ever, ever stay in the U.S. legally. Permanent bar. They're doomed. It's a kiss of death. So if somebody is subject to 212A9C, that person would never, ever, ever be able to stay in the U.S. legally. End of the story. And believe it or not, people who are subject to the 10-year bar that I talked about, if somebody has been here unlawfully present for more than a year, the example that I said, let's imagine that you're 19 or 20 years old. So after the age of 18, you'd been unlawfully present. Let's say that you were brought to the U.S. at the age of 3. You had no say-so. Your parents brought you to the U.S. You're 19 or 20. You're married to a U.S. citizen. You have a U.S. citizen child. This is the country you know. These are the friends that you have. This is the home city that you have. This is the college that you go to. So let's imagine that you, because you'd been unlawfully present for 10 years, sorry, because you'd been unlawfully present for 1 year, let's say somehow you leave the country and come back without a waiver, without a exceptional permission. Then you're subject to 212A9C, my friends. That means forever and ever you're unable to stay in the U.S. legally. Let me give you a true example. Years ago, I represented a very, very nice couple. The lady was a Native American. You can't get, in my opinion, any more American than that. She was 100% full-blooded Native American. And she was married to this young gentleman from Mexico. And he was, in fact, brought to the U.S. when he was 3 years old. They had 3 beautiful children. And he was lucky that he was grandfathered under 245I, the section of the law that we just talked about that would allow somebody to get a green card from inside the U.S. as opposed to having to leave and come back. So he was lucky because he was grandfathered under that section of the law. He was qualified for it before they killed that law. So we applied for his green card. Things were going fine. Then he had to leave. He comes to me and says that his father is sick in Mexico. He said that he has to go to Mexico and attend his dad. And I told him that he cannot do that. I told him that if he sets a foot outside the U.S., he can't come back for 10 years. And if he does, that's the end of the story. I can't represent him anymore. Can't do anything for him. And guess what? He did leave and come back. And when he came back to see me, I told him, I said, there's nothing I can do. Because he said that he went and buried his dad and came back. And there was nothing that we could do for him. Nothing. End of the story. This guy can never, ever, the father of those 3 children can never, ever, ever, ever stay in the U.S. legally. Now, if you don't think that that's horrible, I don't know what else is. So that's why I call it the terrible 212A9C. It's just a very harsh section of our immigration laws. Again, what is the solution to it? This is a problem, just like any other issue. That's what people are talking about when they say our immigration system is broken. It really is broken. Think of how many more examples there are out there of people who are subject to 212A9C where they shouldn't. There should be an exception. And the problem is, when they're subject to it, that's it. That's the end of the story. There's nothing that anybody can do. And again, the key is in the hands of our lawmakers. Our lawmakers can make things happen. They can change things. They can correct these laws. And there are some other examples. I don't know if I have any more time. Two, three more minutes. I very quickly go through them. Again, these are just examples. I can go on and on and on about issues with our immigration system. One is keeping families together. The truth is, every time an immigration law passes, every time that an act has some kind of immigration bill in it, when you read the congressional intent or read the footnotes, you can see that the intent has always been to keep the families together. Our lawmakers, in fact, every time that they do come up with some kind of immigration law, they want to make sure that families are kept together. But the problem is that our immigration system, the way it is now, doesn't keep families together. Now let's talk about some of the examples. There is a thing called visa bulletin. We have a limited number of visa numbers available, green cards available every year, and we have more people applying for it. Then, therefore, the Department of State, what they do, they come up with sort of allotments, and they say, well, for this month, people whose priority dates is on or before this date in this category can apply for green cards. So if I'm a green card holder, and if I get married, I go outside the U.S. and get married to someone outside the U.S., then the problem is that the moment I marry that person, the person has the intention to come and stay in the U.S., so that person, according to our immigration laws today, cannot come to the U.S. with a visitor or student visa. See, that's the problem that we have with our immigration system. So if you want to come to the U.S. as a non-immigrant, you should have no intention to stay in the U.S. So I go marry somebody, that person has to come to the U.S. with an immigrant visa, with a green card. And there is a backlog. So let's say I go get married to someone outside the U.S., and we have a child, and she wants to come to the U.S. It takes 3 or 4 years for her to get to the U.S. I'm not going to see my child for 3 or 4 years before my child can get to the U.S. because the way the laws are today. So that doesn't keep families together. It actually breaks up families. I have seen so many situations like that where people end up being divorced. People, when they are not together, husbands and wives, when they're not together, they get divorced. You like it or you don't like it. It's a fact of life. People get divorced when they're not together. I don't know why, but they do. So the way our laws are, they don't keep families together. Actually, our immigration laws quite often tear families apart. And the last thing that I'm going to mention, there are so many other things. There is no judicial review for many of the immigration decisions. Immigration decisions can be made. People's lives can be affected so drastically, and there is no judicial review. The Congress clearly, on so many situations, decided that there should not be any judicial review. I don't know why. I don't know why. If someone is an immigrant and that immigrant goes through immigration court proceeding or some kind of a decision or another is made on that person's life, it's so important for, you see, I see things from inside. I see how important it is to people to go through the immigration process. And an adjudicating officer makes a decision. He or she may have had a bad day that day, so they make a decision that drastically affects that person's life, and there is no judicial review. That person cannot go to a court and say, Judge, just look at this. Can somebody, he or she cannot take that decision to a higher level for someone to look at. So this is a problem that we have. And there are some other issues there too, but we can, again, there are so many issues that we can talk about. And I do thank you very much, everybody, for having me here. Thank you, James.
And how many of you came here to hear about the wall we're building, right? Did you? Yeah, we're going to talk about that a lot, a little bit. But there's so many numbers, there's so many, as you were saying, terms. I'm just going to tell the story about the people that I've met that have been a part of the process of coming to America. And maybe talk about the wall a little bit too, because I know that's on some people's minds. I lived in Minneapolis. I grew up in Minneapolis, or Minnesota, and so the people that I encountered are from all over the world. So I'm going to talk about 3 different families and talk about kind of some terms with you. The first family was from Sierra Leone. A family fled because of civil war. I guess it was also a war between Sierra Leone and Liberia. And sometimes in some of these countries they call it a resource curse. What happened was they were fighting for diamonds. And so Gaddafi and Taylor, neighboring presidents of neighboring countries, were trying to get remove the president of this country. So this family came from Sierra Leone, fled, and they're called what we term refugees. These are the people that come here because they fear persecution. They fear for their lives. It could be because of their religion. It could be because of, some of you have heard of Rwanda, because of their ethnic background. And they're fleeing a country that they don't think that they are going to probably go back to. They start as seeking asylum, and they hopefully become refugees. When you become refugees, you can stay in America. So this family, mostly women, because the men had been killed. Caleb was probably 2 or 3 when he came. His uncle was about 17, fled in fear, and came to America. And again, each month, new people from his extended family were coming to, in our case, Minneapolis. We're seeing that with Syria. Have a lot of you heard about Syria lately? The president gets to decide how many refugees we're going to bring in, and that is based on he consults with Congress. Currently, just about a week ago, the assistant to the president addressed that issue, is looking at bringing more Syrians into the country. Looking at the data now, they've placed these Syrian refugees in major metropolitan cities like Nashville, Dallas, San Diego. Again, as they're fleeing from their country, we're seeing it's civil war, but also it's a proxy war where America's been getting involved and Russia has been getting involved. So again, that's based on the president. The second family, Colby, his grandfather fought in Vietnam. He was from Laos, and the American government said that we don't want any other countries to fall into become communist. So what they did was they had people, our military, go and train Laotian people. And so Colby's family came from Laos, and their family was refugees because they came and they fought with America. And they brought them to, again, in Minneapolis where we lived. Even in the school system, it was interesting when we were there, they had K through 6 at my son's school. In every class, there was one class in every grade level that was solely Hmong children, and to assimilate them into ESL, so from K through 12. So that is, again, another example of refugees. The last example is Benita, and she came from Mexico. And she is kind of an example of what we hear so much about with this illegal immigration. And you had talked about the numbers too. We're looking at 11.3 illegal immigrants in America currently. And she is one of my examples. She has been sent back to Mexico twice, came back both times to America. She has 4 children. 2 of her children were born in Mexico, and 2 of her children were born in the United States. So a couple of things that have been introduced. In 2001, about a month before 9/11 happened, an act was introduced, the DREAM Act. Have you heard of that? A lot of you heard of that? Again, looking at this issue of children especially. What was introduced in 2001, and it never passed both the House and the Senate. Possibly that could be because of our fears with 9/11, possibly because just values of looking at immigration and students and undocumented children, but it never passed. So what's been introduced lately is it's called it's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's DACA. I don't know if a lot of you have heard of this, but Bernie Sanders has been talking about it. Cruz, Hillary Clinton, looking at what's happening with these children. And Obama, under an executive action, passed this. And he said, well, if you're not going to pass DREAM Act, we need to do something with these children, like you had mentioned. We're going to pass this. I'm going to pass it. I'm going to pass it as my having executive authority. So he passed that, and again, that's what maybe you're hearing some of the debates. If you go to Bernie Sanders' website, if you go to any of the candidates' website, it addresses this. We're looking at the children. Right now, there's also called DAPA, and that is for the parents. Okay, so we have the children and the parents, two different executive orders that have been introduced. What happened though to Texas, there's a justice, a district judge, Andrew Hannon, a district court in Texas, and he filed an injunction along with 26 different states. They said, we need to stop this. This is an executive order that we need to stop. So as of last year, he filed it in February of 2015, and the Supreme Court has not taken any action on that, but you may see that. It's on their docket, and we'll see if the Supreme Court actually addresses that currently. So we're seeing that, again, 26 different states have signed it, Texas being one, North Carolina, Idaho. Do you think our state has signed it? Anybody think our state has signed? Yes?
No.
Yes, our state has signed it. Arkansas, Nevada, a lot of them are, aligned with Mexico. Obviously, North Carolina doesn't, nor does South Dakota. So again, these 26 states are looking at kind of contesting what the President Obama has passed. Again, they're plaintiffs, they're against what's happening. The people that are speaking for this are Homeland Security, which makes sense, Commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, Immigration and Customs, and then U.S. citizenship. So it's really the whole executive kind of departments are looking at making sure this goes through. So those are my three stories. I guess Trump, anybody hear about what Trump just did today, what he addressed or yesterday about the wall? Where does he want that money to come from to pay for the wall? You heard of?
Mexico. It's from Mexico.
But what's specifically from Mexico?
From cash transfers moving back and forth.
Exactly, because is Mexico getting a lot of money coming in from the their citizens here? Right, so he just, in the last 24 hours, that's what he's looking at.
It's still not enough.
Right, looking at these, what the people who are living here in America are sending to their families. And what you do is you go to a money order store, right? And you are sending your money directly to your family. We see that in a lot of, many, not just people who live in Mexico, people from Sierra Leone, like I talked about, from Laos, from China, from probably Iran. And so that's what his idea is regarding that. So,
I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and focus on immigrants who are here legally, although certainly among those immigrant populations in the various states, you also have a fair number of immigrants living in those enclaves who are illegal. But a number of years back, I gave a talk at the honors for the honors program here, and the topic of my talk was the impact of communication technology on societies, and in particular the United States. And during the course of my research for that, what I found quite fascinating was where you have, once upon a time, immigrants who came from other countries to the United States, late 1800s on up into really well into the 20th century. Once those groups came, those individuals came, they were pretty much disconnected from their mother countries. Yes, they could occasionally travel back, but very expensive to go back to a country, then come back. You could certainly write letters before modern technology, the internet and the web. You could write letters, but it takes a fair amount of time to get back to their respective countries. You could subscribe or read a foreign language newspaper within these communities in the United States, and they have sprung up way back in the late 1800s and continue to exist in immigrant communities. But you were pretty much disconnected from the old country, which compelled people to sort of look forward to, you know, that process of assimilation, becoming more Americanized, and that of course is a very a muddy term and very kind of a gray term. It can mean all kinds of things. But when I looked at the innovations in technology, the technology revolution, really they began accelerating from 1939, 40s, but then forward into the 50s, the 60s, and certainly by the 60s and the 70s, accelerating rather rapidly. What fascinated me was the fact that when people come to this country, and a fair number come here legally every single year, the majority of them every year legally, they come from the Americas, as should be expected because it's the region closest to us. The next largest group come from Asian part of Asia, and then the next group is coming from various African countries. But being from California, this was an issue that was really in front of me on a regular basis. I've been in Oklahoma for a long time, some 25 years, but I go back and my friends and are still there, and I have very close connections there. But what I came to realize is that when people come here now and have in the last 30 or 40 years, they can stay connected to their respective home countries. They can communicate to family members 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, through cell phones, through the internet, through Facebook, through Skype, through FaceTime. They can listen to radio stations from their respective countries. They don't have to listen to radio stations that are offered here. In fact, being a great lover of music, I've occasionally listened to radio stations out of Dublin, out of Berlin, out of London. They can watch their country television shows from their home country. They're not compelled to watch American television on regular cable TV. They can watch TV shows from the countries from which they came. I believe the impact that's going to have is that the process of assimilation is going to slow down radically. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I have no opinion on that. I'm completely neutral about that. But there's no reason for people to embrace a broader generic American culture when their own culture from their own country is at their fingertips constantly. When you look at major cities like LA or New York or Miami, we're seeing this in Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, certainly San Francisco Bay Area from where I'm from, Illinois, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minneapolis, where you have large metropolitan areas that contain large immigrant populations, legal immigrants. Let's just throw out all the illegals, just legal immigrant populations. If you're living in LA and you have a population of 150,000 Koreans legally here, living in X number of square miles, if everything there is something that is comfortable for them from the country from which they came, there's no real reason to migrate further out, where once upon a time that would eventually occur over time. You see groups migrate out from inner city areas, they go out to suburbs, and pretty soon we have, as all of us reveal here, generic Americans to some degree. I don't think that's going to continue to happen. And it's not just happening in the United States, it's happening in a lot of the major cities around the world. London, Berlin, in various countries, Australia. The continent of Australia has been going on. And it's rather fascinating because technology is really, not only has it broken down physical boundaries, but it's really allowing people to bleed into one another all over the world. And I'll give you a personal example. I grew up in Santa Clara Valley, Silicon Valley, but when I grew up there, and I'm 63, that was driven by the fruit and vegetable industries. It was overwhelmingly rural. The people that it had historically attracted, my childhood friends, even though I'm German and there's certainly Irish there and, Scandinavian peoples, predominantly people from Latin America, predominantly Mexican, certainly to some extent Chinese, Japanese, Italians, a lot of Portuguese in the greater San Francisco Bay Area back in the day. But with Silicon Valley, which is Santa Clara Valley, but Silicon Valley, that has attracted predominantly people from China, people from India, people from Korea, to a lesser extent, and really not connected to technology, but primarily because of the Vietnam War. You have a huge Vietnamese population there. But I've seen that social and cultural landscape almost flip upside down in a very short period of time. And some of the fields that me and my buddies used to play pickup sports, when we weren't playing organized sports, playing baseball, basketball, tackle football, we weren't doing it for our schools. You saw kids doing that all the time. Now when I go home to visit family and friends, it's not unusual to see a group of men playing cricket out on one of those fields. Certainly soccer, which is the most popular football, the most popular sport in the world, people doing that. But again, I don't know if it's, I don't know what it holds for the future of the country. I sometimes kid my students in my history classes, who grew up, say, in Choctaw. Imagine coming back, if you could come back to Choctaw 70 years from now and discover that overwhelmingly the majority of students who attend Choctaw High School are Asian in origin, or come back to some other community and discover that the social and cultural landscape has transformed. And again, I find it fascinating and very compelling. Nothing else, I love food. And California and the states that have incredibly diverse populations of people, the food is just, it's incredible. But to sum up, I believe that the United States is going to increasingly become that way. It's certainly going to come to states like Kansas and Oklahoma and other places, later than it does, your coastal areas and so on. But I truly believe if you could come back to the United States in 100, 150 years, the makeup of the population, what people are going to look like, what their interests are and so forth, the cultural diversity in the country, what defines an American, it's going to be light years from how we define that today. And again, as an historian, I just see that as the natural process of an evolving world. I mean, the world evolves. It doesn't wait for us, as the old Rolling Stones, time waits for no one. It changes, And so I kind of looked at immigration from that perspective. I'll leave you with this, and this is a site that you might find incredibly fascinating. It's the Migration Policy Institute, and it's a very interactive site that has immigration statistics all over the world. And you can go in and look at cities, at countries, parts of countries, American cities and so forth, and very interactive. You can see population numbers, where people came from, down to the county level and so on. And you really see a world that is changing before our eyes, even though we're sometimes not quite aware of it. So again, that's kind of what I can bring to the table, and what fascinates me as a social and cultural historian. My 2 cents.
Thank you. Very, quite a bit of information all wrapped up into one compact time frame. One of the more fascinating books I've read in the last couple of years is a book called The Next 100 Years. It's by, I believe, Thomas Friedman, in which he looks at current trends as they're happening now and projects over the 21st century what he thinks will be the result of those trends. One of the trends that he noted was a continuing decline in birth rates, not just among developed countries, but among those countries that we would consider today less developed countries. And he lays out an argument that by the mid-21st century, the United States and other more industrialized countries will not be concerned about having too many immigrants, but not enough because we will need that labor, as Professor Cuskey was mentioning, or that'll come back around, that we will actually need more immigrants in the country. I'm interested in if any of you have seen anything along those lines in any of your fields as far as that type of approach, and I'm very interested in, you know, how did we handle that prior, when that was definitely the case. We allowed free immigration because we needed the immigration, and so can we think in another 50, 75 years, will that cycle return? And so I'm going to open up the questions with that question, and be happy to hear from any of you on your thoughts on that.
Well, I think, speaking from history's perspective, I believe that that we can safely say it probably will continue to cycle through, depending on the demand for labor. We may, you know, in the past, our restrictions have been placed on immigrants coming in based on our discrimination policies, and the groups that we discriminated against when discrimination was legal. During the Jim Crow period, it was very simple to discriminate against nationalities, races, religions, things like that. Since the 1960s, that kind of activity is no longer acceptable, but we still find ways to restrict when we need to, or when the people in power at that time think we have the need. But generally, it's driven by the economy. In our country, the economy is number one, right? It's the economy, stupid. So that was a campaign slogan by a former candidate for president. If we need it to boost our economy, if we need immigration, then we're going to make ways for people to come here, however they get here and however long they stay. I think it will be modeled according to society at that time.
Well, I agree with you, Professor. But at the same time, my opinion is that our immigration system is very political, very political. Depending on who the decision makers are, and depending on what political views they have. The truth is, right now we have a group that are somewhat anti-immigrant, and those are the folks that they don't want all these immigrants, legal or illegal, to come to the U.S. and take our jobs, and it's really, really important to keep these jobs here and to keep Americans do the work. Then we have the other group that is more pro-immigrant, and they're thinking, okay, well, let's think that tomorrow we get all these immigrants, all these illegal immigrants out of the U.S. Who's going to be mowing your lawn, and who's going to be taking care of the construction work, and who's going to be doing the things that they do that we need? The truth is that we do need them, and the truth is, as far as the labor goes, I represent employers more so than other groups. Possibly more of my clients are employers than other types of immigration clients. And I have clients, businesses, that they are willing to pay. It's not that they want to pay less. It's not that they want to hire illegals. They want to hire legal people. They want to hire more. They have all the insurances and everything that you want. They're constantly running ads. They just cannot find the proper help. The fact that we have a 3 or 4% unemployment rate, that doesn't mean that there are people out there that they don't have jobs and we can find workers just like that. The truth is we can't. And the truth is, and it might be that it is true that I'm an immigration lawyer. It is true that in general I am more pro-immigrants than many of the other people out there. But honestly, we do need immigrants to come to the U.S. to help us with our labor force. We do have the need. And what kills me is we have the employers. They beg and plead for more visa numbers. For example, there is a visa named H-1B. This is for specialty workers. We have more and more employers that are asking for the visa numbers to be available. In fact, many businesses, to protest the fact that the Congress is limiting the number of visas for H-1B workers, they are opening factories and businesses outside the U.S. to show that, hey, if you don't let us bring the specialty workers that we need, we're going to have to go to where they are. And then still, we have only 65,000 visa numbers available for H-1B classification. And every year, we run out of visa numbers the first day that we can file. And the last 2-3 years, we had more than 3 or 4 times as many applicants the first day than the number of visa numbers. Yes, sir.
Are they awarded by a lottery system? How?
Yes, sir. They're using a lottery system because really we tell our clients that your chance of being able to get a visa number for the employee that you want to hire is 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. It's just used by lottery. Thank you. Professor.
I'm just gonna kind of piggyback on that. Yeah, I think there's a gate that why we could look at wages and what we're paying the workers to come in here. We're gonna have to negotiate, I think, especially with wages, if they're we need these workers to be filling these jobs. Because I don't see how you're still having vineyards that need to be worked and beef farms that need to be worked. So I don't think anything's going to be changing with that those industries. But I think maybe we're going to have to be looking at wages where people are going to want to fill these jobs. So I'm just going to jump on what you said too.
I don't have any comment.
I want to piggyback, and then I'll open it up for others on what you were talking about, Professor Hotrick. A lot of the research, and in fact, I looked at a survey, I think it was by Pew, just recently, where they again reaffirmed stuff that I have read previously, which is kind of the immigration pattern is the first generation gets here, they of course generally, unless they're a skilled worker, are rather poor. Their second generation, they actually learn English, become more adapted. By the third or fourth generation, those children and grandparents of the original immigrants consider themselves American in whatever generic sense that we all consider ourselves American. I'm wondering if the pattern you're discussing is one in which, is that going to change? Is it going to slow down? Or is this a process that is making the adjustment for that first immigration family a little bit easier, and we're still going to see these succeeding generations more blend into the larger culture?
I personally don't think we're going to see that. I mean, I see the world, given communication technology, and people have access to information all over the world, about where you want to move, how you want to live, where you can find work, etc., and so on. And my sense, and I could be very wrong about this. I mean, I'm not a fortune teller, but my sense is that you'll see, certainly in the United States and other major cities around the world, they will be populations. Well, yes, there'll be German people, there'll be British people, there'll be Americans, but that will simply come on. It'll take on a new meaning because people will live. I think you're going to see this country certainly, and you already seen it in the major American cities, more balkanized in communities, socially and culturally balkanized. Not balkanized in a negative way. It's just you have these pockets of various people from around the world. There's no reason for them to blend into some sort of a generic. The American identity will be this very intense mix of very persevering cultures, if you will. And that, I think, is a fascinating thing. It's not negative or positive. I have no idea what the ramifications are, but it's just something, because of technology and the ability of people to just stay connected. I mean, people learn English, certainly. I'll give you an example. There's a business I frequent here in Midwest City that 2 Korean women own. They are married to non-Korean American men. Their children were raised bilingual, so their children speak both Korean and English. They themselves speak English. They're very Americanized. They own a business, came here legally, etc., and so forth. Whenever I go into the business, they're watching Korean television on their computer. the language amongst themselves. They're speaking Korean. When I come in, they speak English to me, but they maintain that linguistic traditions. So large in states like California, especially San Francisco Bay Area and LA, where you already have seen this happen really a number of decades ago. But it's going to continue to happen and is happening in the major cities, and it's going to recreate what it means to be an American. I mean, I could imagine, and I could be completely wrong, 100 years from now, maybe you're going to have an American population that doesn't find like football all that compelling. Maybe you'll find. I know. I mean, I love it. I mean, nobody loves sports more than me, and the people in here who know me. I mean, I always tell people, Dr. Hooker, what do you watch? And I go, if it doesn't involve a scoreboard, I'm probably not watching it. But I just think if the world is changing because of that technology, and again, I think people are they're migrating all over the place in search of opportunities, and they'll go where the best opportunities are. And I'm not a flag-waving American. I don't look at our country without, realizing its faults and its flaws. But there's a reason why people pour into this country legally and illegally, and have for a long time. There's an enormous amount of opportunity here, and people can go about their business largely unimpeded in pursuit of those opportunities. I mean, you don't have hundreds of millions of people moving to Romania or to some, a country in the middle of the African continent. I mean, there's a reason why people come here, and they're able to see it through technology, the opportunities that are here. But I don't know what the future holds. I mean, I'm no expert, but it's just very fascinating. I find it to be very compelling.
You use that word balkanization, and us political scientists get very nervous. So.
Yeah. I don't view that as it can be a negative word, but I don't view that as a negative word whatsoever. Not at all.
Professor, there are a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So, I'm sorry. I'd like to apologize for coming in late. I had a previous class I was attending. My question is related to, are you saying that there is instead of a blend of culture, there's more isolated pockets of separate cultures existing currently in America now because of the advent of the internet?
I very much do believe that. I mean, certainly you have people that access the broader generic American culture. But yeah, if you came in late, my main premise is that with technology, it allows people to stay more connected on a daily basis to the countries from which they came. And then when they do come, they're staying, I think, longer in those enclaves of people similar to themselves. Yes, they might go to a baseball game, a football game, or what have you. They might go to, some steakhouse or whatnot. But they're clinging more tenaciously to their own cultures. They're American, here legally, they're American citizens, but I think it's taking on a new meaning of what it means to be an American, even more so than in the past, because I mean, we've always been a nation of incredible diversity, but I think people are going to cling more tenaciously.
Professor Dawkins?
Yeah, the political right argues often against immigration from a concern or fear that those that come are going to vote against them. The political left argue against immigration based on the fear that they're going to outperform them on the job place and take jobs from them. And I'm wondering, it seems like all of us that aren't from a Native American tradition, our families got here just by coming to America. I think some of the same arguments that are making today against immigrants could be made against our ancestors that came before us. And yet I don't find any moral arguments coming from those who oppose immigration. There's always some ulterior motive. And I'm wondering, is it not immoral to deny people the human right to come and settle and make a life for themselves here in the United States?
Tough question. Who wants to jump on that first?
Well, Craig, I mean, I don't know if a refusal is an immoral thing, but certainly if the numbers that are tossed around, and those are the numbers that I'm familiar with, 11.3 million illegal immigrants here, people are coming here for all kinds of reasons that all of us have mentioned, but they're coming here for opportunities. They're not coming here to, this notion they're coming here to engage in criminal activities, not just being here illegally, but, doing this, that, and the other. Certainly people do, but, I mean, I think that's a reflection that it's a human condition to want to survive and to improve your quality of life, the quality of life of your families, or what have you. And I don't know how you put a stop on that. I mean, you know, sometimes I'll ask my students, you know, how do we deal with this, you know, illegal immigration and everything, and you know, people chirp, you know, we built a big giant wall around it, and the image that comes to my mind is like a giant castle. And I always tease them, I said, that would be great. Build a giant like stone wall around the entire United States, maybe have a large moat, fill it with seawater so you can put some white sharks in there, maybe shock, you know, electric shock, and we could go back to the feudal system, you know, where we're living in like one giant castle, even though it's like a country. I don't know how you deal with it, but I think as long as human beings, I think it's a basic instinct to survive and to improve themselves, and will take substantial risks to do that. I don't know how the nation, I mean, I don't know what we do. I mean, I'm glad I'm just some, you know, little history professor at Rose State College. I'm glad I don't have to grapple with those big issues. I don't know how we resolve it ultimately, because I think history shows that everything we've done, people continue to come here legally and illegally, and there's reasons for it. I mean, there's a reason.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I guess being in Mexico too, as people are fleeing to America, I think the president of Mexico needs to address this. I think the president needs to say, people are leaving by the droves my country. What is happening? And you know, you look at the history of Mexico, they found oil reserves, they invested, then oil crashed, and we're seeing that in Oklahoma, kind of the fallout of investing. And if an oil price goes down, it affects the economy. I would really like to see presidents address these issues, looking at why people are leaving, because it's for economic opportunity. And I think that's on these presidents. Like I talked about Caleb from Sierra Leone. That's on these presidents to flee their country. I don't think, and this is my opinion, I don't think a lot of people love to leave their own country, love to leave their language, love to leave their food and their family and their loved ones. I don't think a lot of the people want to do that. I think they would rather be in Sierra Leone, in Laos, in Mexico. And I think these presidents need to address those issues. So I think there's two sides to this.
That's a great point.
Dr. Ortiz.
I would just ask on a macrostructural, sociology level, it'd be great for the presidents to address these issues, but how? In terms of what is the world, and especially the United States with the resources, doing to allow them a say in, what the options are, the opportunities are for their citizens. So, yeah, ideally I would love to have, Mexico's president address his citizens, or the country's citizens. But I ask on a macrostructural level, what are we doing globally to allow, answers for his citizens?
And I think one of the things came in 1994 with NAFTA, right? We're opening trade. And, being in Mexico, they're like, we can't even compete with Americans because, your technology is different. But I think, as we've done, you bring businesses, you invest in small businesses, you invest in women, families. I know that American countries have gone in and really abused Mexico. That's definitely true. But I think as a leader of these countries, that's on them. But I appreciate your point. Yes. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think
I have an unrelated question. So if you're going to continue, please don't let me interrupt.
Would you repeat that again?
No, go ahead with
Okay,
your question.
I have another question. It's involving I feel like there is currently an existing ratio of skilled labor to unskilled laborers existing in America. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Is it also fair to say that there's an existing need for skilled laborers and unskilled laborers, and a certain demand for those certain? I want to know, what is each panelist's opinion on that current ratio, and where do they project it being in 10 years from now, based on current immigration laws and current trends?
Right. Well, I'll start since I deal with immigration law. Obviously, there is a ratio out there, but the question is whether or not that ratio is the proper ratio. And different people look at it and may have different opinions about it. It is true that for the skilled labor, we do have a shortage. And it is true. And now, how do I gauge that? How do I say that? Because we have so many visa numbers available for people who can come legally to the U.S. to fill those positions, and we run out of visa numbers just right away. Even for the non-skilled laborers, we still have backlogs, which means there are more employers applying for these employees than the visa numbers available. So obviously the government is thinking that we do not need as many laborers coming to the U.S. as they are coming. On the other hand, obviously there are employers who think that we need more laborers, skilled or unskilled, to come to the U.S., but there are just not enough visa numbers. I think ultimately we need to look at it through the viewpoint of through the political viewpoint. And we need to see why it is that politically we are resisting immigration to the U.S. And it's just like, it's like two dishes that are connected and there's fluid in them. If one of them is more full, it sort of becomes equal eventually. It's like the concept of osmolarity in science.
Yeah, exactly.
When there's need, the need is going to suck in the fluid or the thing that is needed. There is a need in the U.S. for immigrants. We do have the need for immigrant workers to come to the U.S. and to do things that we need them to do. But our political system is resistant. Why it is beyond me.
I also have to make the point, and this goes back to what Professor Dawkins said, I do believe that there's a moral issue involved in immigration. I think racism has played a big part in our history of immigration law over the centuries, and I also think that there is an issue of race between our skilled and unskilled, and where Americans want to be categorized. I can't help but reflecting on the fact that when certain jobs, unskilled jobs, are categorized as Mexicans do that work, or Latinos or Hispanics do that work, like lawn mowing and farm labor, migrant farm labor, people that are considered mainstream America, white Americans, don't want those jobs because they're associated with dark-skinned people. I know that this is a bold statement, but this is my perception, and I believe that that is the need that a lot of the immigrant population fills in the unskilled labor category, because Americans don't like to look at themselves as unskilled labor. We don't like to categorize ourselves in that vein.
I agree with you completely. Would it be fair to say that typically now college education is much more available, and thus we are seeing an increase in the number of skilled laborers? Maybe
Since the cost of college is so expensive now, I would not say it's more available. I think the cost of college is a huge roadblock for a lot of students and across the nation. It's hard for me to say what the rest of the nation is thinking about college because I live in Oklahoma.
Sure.
I know what Oklahomans think about college. In general, it's not highly regarded, which is why we're having so much trouble getting it funded.
Really?
Right. Oklahoma does not offer that many professional skilled job opportunities, right? We can't get businesses to move to Oklahoma because our education system is so bad. So you don't need that many professional skilled employees in Oklahoma. I don't know what they need in the rest of the country, but I do think that this is an underlying factor.
All right, we have hit our time. I want to thank everyone for coming. Thank you for the questions. I do have one final presentation here. We have some gifts for our panelists. So let me get these out. Each of you will receive this little world map cork board with some push pins, some golden owl push pins. So if you want to just pass those down the way there.
Facilities provided by Rose State College Professional Training Center.